This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Welcome, everyone, to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back. If this is if you've been returning and listening along since the beginning, especially welcome to you. And if it's your first time listening, welcome. And I'm joined, as always, by Richard Blackaby.
It's good to be with you, Sam. You look rested, like you've been to the beach or something.
Yeah, likewise. We've both actually just come back from the beach and getting some vitamin D in, and
survived Hurricane Delta.
Yeah. It was threatening all week, and
it just gave you bigger waves to boogie board on. Apparently,
they were some of the best waves, for sure.
You still got your boogie, Sam. I'll tell you that.
Oh boy, that's a different podcast. We'll save that for another time. But yeah, so it's good to get away, to kind of have a little bit of a reset. Although with a 1-year-old, you never really get away unless you drop the 1-year-old off at a grandparent's house.
Yeah, you got a vacation with a grandparent.
That's true. It definitely eases the stress of having a 1-year-old. But it's good to be back in studio and looking at ways to take your leadership to the next level. And today you've got a special study for us, looking at Paul. Yeah. And why don't you tell us what we're going to be looking at today?
Well, Sam, it's an interesting one. We've touched on this topic before, but I have a friend that for years was working in corporate America. He was one of the early hires at a very successful company. For years, he progressed. He was one of the top 10 hires in this very significant company. And he was technically a Christian, but he wasn't really living for God. And then at a certain point, like a decade or more in, he has a real encounter with God. And all of a sudden, he's trying to live for Christ now. And he's never been a witness. He's never taken a stand. Never really practiced his faith openly. No one would ever know he was a Christian before, but now they're going to know. And he's not obnoxious about it, but he just tries to sort of come out of the closet, if you will, as a Christian. Well, that causes, it's a very secular company, very a publicly traded company, and he doesn't push his faith on anyone, but he starts to get on people's radar. Oh, he's gotten religion. And ultimately, long story short, he gets ushered out the door. And it's all sort of political maneuvering and so on. They don't come right out and just say it's because you're Christian, but everything goes south for him at that point. And he does get confronted for his Christian values. And sometimes just having Christian values, people feel threatened. People feel, and I've seen this.
Which I think we could probably do a whole podcast on just having those values and how that's seen as a threat to so many.
And they feel judged. I mean, I remember way back when I was still working my way through college, and I'd be working on a construction crew and out of town, and they'd all want to go to a bar or something like that. And they knew I was a Christian. They knew I didn't do that. I didn't hang out in those kind of places, and I wasn't judgmental. I didn't preach at them. I just said, "Hey, I'm just going to pass on that." But still, they knew why I was passing. I never say why I passed. I said, "Hey, I didn't condemn them for doing what they want to do. It just simply, I was going to I'm just going to go back to the room, and I'm worn out. I tried to be gracious. I tried to find some excuse, but it was like, well, why won't you come with us? Why are you too good for us? No. Can I just choose not to do something? But that's basically what happened to him, is that people felt judged by him. They felt like he was all of a sudden getting holier than thou, and he ends up unemployed eventually. Now God got him back on his feet, and he's gainfully employed today. But that happens a lot. And the question he had was, all the time that I was not walking with Jesus, I was zooming up the corporate ladder. Why is it? And everybody liked me, and not a thing in my personnel file about ever having a conflict. And all of a sudden I start living for Jesus, and that's when all the trouble starts happening. I start getting written up and called into my boss's office. And so why is that? Why is it that sometimes the closer you get to God, the more you try to do for him, it seems as if more troubles arise at the same time? And there's a wonderful verse, you mentioned Paul earlier, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, Paul's kind of wrapping things up in that final chapter of that book, and he's kind of giving the Corinthians his travel plans. And verse 8, he says, but I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost. And then verse 9, he says, because a wide door for effective ministry has opened for me, yet many oppose me. And I've always been fascinated by that verse 9. He says a wide door of opportunity has arisen. It just seems as if God's opening so many doors right now for me to see people come to Christ and start churches and minister for him. And then in the same breath, he says, but many oppose me.
Which, we often think of open doors, and, when God closes a door, he opens a window, and those types of the sentiment is when the door is open, it's easy.
Yeah.
But Paul would seem to suggest otherwise.
Yeah. It's funny. It kind of reminds me of that joke where the guy said, my uncle used to always say, one door closes, another opens. He says, and he goes on to say, he was a great philosopher, not a great carpenter. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
Anyway, so why does that happen? You would think, and I think whether we would say this out loud or not, our sense is when I really get red hot for God, that's when he ought to just pave the street for me.
Yeah.
Just ought to make way. Richard's
money
on fire
starts
now.
falling from the sky.
And,
mountains are made level.
Well, and at least when it comes to just doing God's work, maybe I don't get rich, but if I'm on fire to tell people about Jesus, I shouldn't get. If I'm all of a sudden I'm witnessing to everybody at work, why would God let me get fired from work? Well, why wouldn't God protect me so I can win lots of people to Christ? But and so with Paul, Paul has raised people from the dead. Paul has been bitten by poisonous snakes, and God has protected him from that. People have plotted to kill Paul, and God protected him from being killed. Why can't God just remove the opponents? Why can't God just silence all of those people that are just hounding him all the time? If I were God and I want to get, and this is the first century, I'm trying to get this church grounded and spread out. And I've got an apostle, Paul, willing to go anywhere, do anything, preach anything for me. I would have like a legion of angels guarding that guy and just saying, you mess with that guy and you're in trouble. Like I'll send Gabriel after you. And yet it just seems that if you read the biographies of any of the great Christian leaders, the ones who accomplished the most, oftentimes they were also the ones that had the most opposition, the most conflict. A lot of them, like a Charles Spurgeon or a Whitefield, they died relatively young from health complications. And you think, Whitefield, Spurgeon, like two of the greatest preachers of all time, like, God, why didn't you just give them super strength? At least let them live to be 80 or 90, not die in their 50s. But for some reason, in God's economy, as he opens doors, you can pretty well take it to the bank that negative things will rise up right along with the positive. And
I suspect that you have some observations.
I do.
in that regard. And so why would that be?
Well, let me just throw some of them at you. One is just that when you start doing things for God, you attract people's attention. People don't notice you beforehand. They don't even know to criticize you before because you didn't stand out. You weren't doing anything of note. And so, as long as you play it safe all your life, you may not have a lot of opponents. You won't get anything done. You'll look back on your life and there'll be nothing to show for it, but at least you won't have had a lot of opposition.
Yeah.
And so early on, you just got to decide, how much do I want God to use my life? And if I really want God to use my life to bless others, to build his kingdom, to see people come to Christ, then I'm going to have to be unsafe. I'm going to have to draw people's attention. I remember when, and it happens in so many ways. I remember when I became a seminary president, we were hardly able to pay our bills. We were very small, and God began to bless, and we built a lot of new buildings. We increased student size and so on. And so we're all praising God. Look at all the new housing we have. Look at the guest house we built. Well, all of a sudden we get slapped with an arbitrary tax bill where the county has just completely arbitrarily just looked and said the same thing. Look at all the stuff they've got up there. Let's just triple their taxes. No basis, no grounding, just triple. And I end up going to court for a couple of years battling this, and finally, while I was there at least, we won every court case, but we had to hire a lawyer and spend time in court and challenge all their findings. And it's like, when we had nothing on the Hill, nobody was trying to tax us and trying to get any money from us. But as soon as you start having success, you just start attracting notice, and some of that notice will be positive. People may praise you, but there'll be others ready to tax you, criticize you, attack you some way. That just comes with the territory. If you're a leader and you get up on the platform, people have noticed you now, and for good or for ill. Second thing is when you do something, you open yourself up for critics, for trolls, for armchair critics. You just write a blog or put out a tweet. It's been funny to me sometimes. I'll maybe put out I've got a Twitter account. I put stuff on Facebook, and I'll put something out that I'll think is relatively straightforward about God or the Christian life or something. And I'm always surprised sometimes by the trolls, by the people that just are on you. And sometimes I get these really nasty attacks, and sometimes if I'm in a weak moment, I may click on them to say, well, who is this person? And number one, they're almost never one of my followers or friends or whatever, but somehow this has come on their radar. And they may have 4 followers of their own, but they want to just troll people that have followers and just give them a hard time. And you get to the point anymore in this kind of age where you can think, is it even worth it? I mean, when I do put something out there, it always encourages people. I also have a lot of followers who just are grateful every day. They'll say, I'd look for your message every day because it's encouraging, it makes me feel great. But then you think, but now I'm subjecting myself to armchair theologians and critics and atheists and other things, and is it worth it to face that? And so as soon as you write a book, now you've got experts who've never written a book necessarily, but they're ready to critique yours and explain why no one should read it. And so you've got to have kind of a tough skin.
And you just have to not read the comment section.
Yeah, and most of the time I just really, really try not to, because it's rarely ever edifying. But
it's so much easier to criticize than to actually put your own creative work out there. You know, like anybody can say, oh, well, what about X or what about Y? It's like, well.
And so that's another. I mean, if you're going to do something like that, especially if you put something in writing that now can be critiqued and analyzed and fact checked and whatever else, you've just set yourself up for that. Several other things why that can happen. A third one, on a little different note, is when you do start leading, when you do start focusing and serving the Lord, you can become distracted. And I've actually known people that were trying to do good things. Like maybe you're a pastor and you come to a church that is at death's door and you're trying to turn it around. So you start putting in long hours trying to fix that church and trying to satisfy disgruntled members and retrieve people who've left the church and that kind of thing. But in the process of trying to do a good thing, you neglect your family, you neglect your health. You neglect your own walk with God. And so all of a sudden your wife's not happy or your kids are on drugs, and you think, why am I getting all these satanic attacks? Why all this spiritual warfare? Here I am trying to save a church from dying, and I've got all these attacks. And sometimes they're not even necessarily attacks. It's just that you got so obsessed with trying to do good. Or maybe you started a company and you just don't want to go belly up. And so you're putting in every evening, you're putting in long hours at the office, but you're neglecting your wife, and all kinds of trouble can result from that. And so again, when you're trying to do good and then you wonder, why did you get slammed with something bad? Sometimes it's just because you were out of balance, you're out of kilter, you were just too obsessed with doing good, building a business, going up. You might be trying to say to yourself, as soon as I get up this corporate ladder, I'm going to ease off and enjoy my family. But by the time you're at the top of the ladder, you don't have a family anymore.
Yeah.
So a fourth one is just that sometimes you get on Satan's radar. And there's a lot we could say about Satan. Sometimes I think he gets too much credit.
Yeah.
Satan
We've talked about that before.
Yeah, and Satan is limited. I don't know how many demonic forces he has, but he doesn't have a limitless number. And there's no evidence Satan can create more demons. I mean, he's only got so many. And I don't know how many have been already dealt with by Jesus in his day or what. I don't know how all that works. But I don't know that he has 7 billion demons. I don't know that he has as many demons at his disposal as there are people on the planet. And so I don't know that, there used to be the old picture of everyone had an angel on one shoulder and a demon on the other. I don't know how many angels there are out there either, or how many demons. But there may not be 7 billion of either one. And so that means that Satan has got to make choices. He's got to be strategic. And so if you're not living for the Lord, maybe you're living lukewarm Christianity, maybe you're a hypocrite, he doesn't need, why waste a bullet on you, That's like, you're better off, you're more useful to him just being that lukewarm Christian. Why would he mess you up? Maybe if you brought too much pressure out to bear, you might start returning to God. So let's just leave him like he is. But all of a sudden you start serving God. You start getting serious about him, and then now you're on his radar. And now he hates people that are fruitful, that bring glory to God, that love God. When he saw Job doing that, and God so pleased with Job, Satan couldn't stand it. It's like, hey, well, I want to take that one on. It's interesting with David. All the years he's being hounded and chased around and by an evil king. He's writing these beautiful psalms that end up in the Bible, and then when he's successful, when he is now the king, that's when he gets a little vulnerable to evil, and he has
a bunch of spare time on his hands.
Yeah, he's got spare time, and which kind of leads to actually a fifth point. It would be a similar thing, and that is sometimes when you're serving God, it gives you a false sense of security. It's kind of like, hey, well, I'm a pastor, so I think
you're doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, and so God's going to I know I'm kind of been neglecting my wife. I know we haven't been on a family vacation in 5 years, but I'm serving the Lord. I feel like He'll make up the difference, and so sometimes we can get careless. We can just feel like, I don't have to be careful about all these things because, hey, if you're serving the Lord, He'll make up the difference. And where you've fallen short as a husband or a wife or a dad or mom, I remember Exodus chapter 4, verse 24. God has dealt with Moses and told him, "I want you to go to Egypt. We're going to deliver the Israelites," and all that gets worked out in chapters 3 and 4. And so Moses is on his way to Egypt. And then in verse 24, there's a very interesting verse. It says, so God was waiting for Moses to kill him. It's like, what on earth? You just had a 2-chapter long conversation convincing him to go to Egypt. Now you're going to kill him? But apparently Moses had never circumcised his son. And although he's Hebrew, he's never carried out and done apparently what Abraham and his descendants had all done. And so God says, look, you can't lead my people if you're not going to even follow the rules yourself. I'm not going to have a hypocrite serve me. And so, of course, his wife kind of steps in and circumcises their son and all is well. But I've thought to myself, just because you're Moses, just because you're about to go deliver all the Israelites, doesn't mean that you can neglect God's commands for your own family, for your own life. And so sometimes I think that's the problem. There's opposition. Again, it may not even be because of any evil opposition from anyone else. It just may be that you just assume that God was going to protect you and make up all the difference for your poor leadership. And then you discover to your dismay that He's not. 2 last things I'd say. Another one is when you do start serving God, when you start leading for God, it can foster jealousy and even competition from other people. Sometimes they're other Christians. I remember my dad, when he came to his church in Canada, None of these churches in that area had ever started a mission church in all the years that they'd been there. Some of those pastors had been there quite a while. And my dad gets there to one of the smallest churches of all in that association, and he just starts churches right and left. And of course, if for years all of your associates have said it's impossible, it's too hard, people aren't open, the funding isn't available, and then instead of just believing all the negative outlook, you just go ahead and start doing it. Well, that's kind of embarrassing, and it makes people look bad. And how do you explain to your people that you haven't started a mission in 20 years, and a guy who's been there just 3 years, he's already got 3 or 4 missions started? How do you explain that? And so as long as everybody is equally abysmal at their leadership, then you don't really stand out. It's not, you don't have to be embarrassed. But when all of a sudden someone starts showing that it can be done, that it's not impossible, there is a way, well, that's going to cause people you're going to ruffle some feathers. You don't have to be looking for trouble. My dad was never a prideful person. He never went around bragging about what he had done. But nonetheless, as soon as you rise above, as soon as you break the trend, you get on people's radar, and your success may put them in a bad light. And so don't be surprised. And my dad faced some of the worst opposition and critics he got were from his own colleagues, from his own fellow pastors, not necessarily from unbelievers or atheists, but from fellow Christians, people in his own denomination, because he was having some success. So and Paul had the same thing. Paul was constantly being hounded by people in Corinth and other places, trying to criticize him and backbite him and try to diminish what he had done, and you pick that up throughout his letters. And then, I guess 2 last things. Seventh thing is just anytime you try to change something, expect opposition. And so as soon as you start making something better, there's going to be it involves change. You have to change things to make them better. And so that will really catch you off guard. I remember when I came to a struggling church, and it had been declining for years, but all of a sudden we start growing, and new people start joining. You'd think everybody would be happy. Hey, we've got more hands to help do the work now. We've got reinforcements coming in. We got some fresh arms and legs here to do the work here. But there were people who liked being really needed. They liked being swamped with work. They liked having influence in a small pond. But as there gets to be more fish in that pond and more talented fish coming into that pond, stronger leader fish coming into that pond, all of a sudden they're feeling threatened. And I literally had people, when they would be open with me, to say, well, I'm just worried that you won't need us anymore. And I'm thinking, what on earth? Like we want everybody that wants to serve and to work and to minister together. The more the merrier. But I actually had more problems as we experienced success than when we were down on the mat, ready to expire. With success, all of a sudden people are measuring, well, where do I fit into this? And will the pastor still have time for me when we have all these new people come in? And will I still have influence? And will I still be in charge of that when we've got we're expanding and increasing the staff? And so as you change things, as things begin to grow, there's always change. Any kind of change there's inevitable. There'll be those that will resist it for various less than wholesome reasons. And then just maybe the last one is just light exposes darkness. And so especially when you start doing things for the Lord, expect it that, and like the example I used when I was in college, you don't have to condemn anyone. You have to preach at anybody. Just simply living for Christ, there's a light that shines from you that will expose darkness. And I remember even as a pastor, when the church was very dysfunctional, they would just tolerate all kinds of dysfunctional carnal people because they just needed people. And so some of these carnal people even got into places of leadership. And then all of a sudden I come in and we just start talking about God again. We start trying to be godly. We don't tolerate unchristlike behavior. Well, all of a sudden it exposes people that that's how they operate. That's how they used to say crass things, and everybody just kind of looked the other way and ignored it. But all of a sudden, we're not doing that anymore. And the more light that was shed in the church, you could just see the people who embraced darkness feeling less and less comfortable.
Yeah.
And so, especially if you're working in a secular setting, in an office with other non-Christians, it could be something as simple as someone just tells a dirty joke and everybody's laughing but you. And you're not necessarily shaking your head in disgust. You're not. It may be you may be trying to be as polite as you can, but it becomes obvious you just don't find humor in that, and you're the only person that doesn't use profanity in the office. And now someone curses like a sailor, and they look at you and say, "Oh, sorry, Sam," and now you haven't said anything. You didn't condemn them. But just being salt, just being light, began to expose them. And I like to joke sometimes, if you want to have fun with someone, just when you're on an airplane or something, just even if you're not a minister, just tell them you're a Baptist minister and watch people squirm. I try not to just lead with that because it can set people off right away. I want to at least build a relationship first. But I've had where I finally told people what I did, and inevitably they want to start confessing their sins to me, and I haven't said anything. You just tell them I'm a Baptist minister. They'll start telling you, "Well, I haven't been in church in years. I grew up in church. I really should get back. I've just been so busy." And it's like, why are you telling me all this? But and so when you if you're the more you're gonna draw closer to Christ, the more like Christ you become. The more of a contrast there will be between you and the world around you. And they ultimately crucified Jesus. The world around him couldn't, the unchristian world, the unreligious world, the sinner world actually kind of was attracted to him. But there were forces, though, that just could not tolerate him and the light he shone upon them. And I think that was Paul's issue as well. The more he fervently sought the Lord, the more opposition there was as well. The more success, the more opposition. And so don't be caught by surprise by that. It's going to happen. If it happened to Paul, if it happened to Jesus, don't be surprised when, as you are trying to step out in faith and do what you feel like God wants you to do, that on the one hand, there'll be new opportunities. On the other, there'll be new opposition.
Well, that's great. Let's take a quick break here, and we'll wrap up when we come back. Twice a year, Blackaby Ministries hosts a spiritual leadership coaching workshop in the Atlanta area. The focus of this workshop is learning how to ask the right questions to help move people onto God's agenda. The next workshop is October 26th to 28th, and registration is open now. The early bird rate is available until September 26th, and space is limited. To find out more and to register, visit blackabycoaching.org. Links will be in the show notes. All right, Richard, just as we wrap up here, what are some last takeaways that you can leave with us?
Let me just give you a quick list, Sam. One is just expect it. Expect opposition. Paul had it. Jesus had it. All the disciples had it. I think maybe John may have been the only disciple not to die a natural death.
It was in prison essentially.
Yeah, there's a great opportunities. If you want to serve the Lord, He'll give you great opportunities. But just don't be surprised when there's also great opposition and trouble that comes. Secondly, draw. If you're going to get serious with God, stay as close to Him as possible. The greater your profile, if you get promoted, sadly, as some people rise up on the corporate ladder, as their church grows, as their influence grows, they believe that they have less time to be with God. I would say it's just the opposite. The greater your profile, the more you need to spend time with God. The more of a target you become to Satan and to others as well, the more that people want to take you down. And so if God is blessing you and giving you greater opportunities in ministry and leadership roles, then spend that much more time with Him, staying close to Him. A third thing is just develop a prayer team. Get some people around you that are praying for you, because especially I had one CEO friend of mine was strongly urged to run for the U.S. Senate for her state, and she asked me to pray for her about that. And I thought she'd make a great senator, but I just really grieved. She was in a vulnerable place with her family, was really needed by her kids at that time. And I could just envision the vicious attacks and the lies and the slander that comes with the political world. And I didn't want her to have to go through that, but I did say, listen, if you're going to run, you better have a big prayer team. And so whether you're running for Senate or you're just, you're moving up the corporate ladder, you've just been made the CEO, have people praying for you, because Satan just delights in having prominent Christians fall. And don't think that it would never happen to you. I don't think I've ever known a prominent Christian that fell into scandal and to sin that ever thought it would happen to him or to her. And the fourth thing, just draw closer to your spouse. The more that you're leading in a prominent way, that again, it's not a time to neglect your spouse. It's a time to get very close to your spouse. And I've shared before, but oftentimes my wife will be sensitive to things that I'm not noticing. She'll be aware of dangers that I don't even pick up on, especially a lot of times with other women. Your wife, if you're a man, your husband, if you're a woman, they know how men think or how women think. And so stay close to them and heed their warnings. I would just say if they sense there's something wrong, or if they just see in your life that things are getting to you, you're getting short-tempered, you're getting irritable. Spouses have a wonderful way of just calling a timeout and saying, "Hey, listen, I know you think you can handle this, but it's wearing you down, and I'm concerned about this." And then finally, you're ultimately going to have to decide where you're going to focus. You could focus on the possibilities, or you could focus on the problems. And you can't ignore opponents. I mean, you've got to be aware of them and aware of their attacks.
Sure.
But that should not be driving your life. It shouldn't be driving don't let your critics, your enemies, set the agenda for your leadership. You're going to have to deal with them in some way or another, but let the possibilities drive your leadership. No matter what it is you're leading, look for those doors of opportunity like Paul did. Paul never missed an opportunity. He had to keep his head up sometimes so that it didn't get chopped off by an enemy coming from behind. But that never stopped. His focus, his drive was always the possibilities. And every time you read a letter from him, he's always talking about, well, I'm planning to go to Spain, or when I get to Rome, or I'm going to be doing this. I head to Jerusalem right now. He always was focused on the open doors and where he was headed next. He'll mention the opposition. Sometimes, like in this verse, he'll do it in the very same verse. But you know what's driving him. It's not the problems, it's the possibilities. And so don't be surprised by them, but don't be hijacked by them either.
Well, as we try to elevate your leadership, this is always just a great reminder to know that as you stand for Christ and for those values that matter, that there will be difficulty ahead. And thanks for taking us through this, Richard. And I want to remind those listening that a week from now, we're going to have a live Tuesday morning devotional. We haven't had one in a while.
Yeah.
We were doing that for quite a bit during lockdown and the beginning of the year. But we've got one coming up. So it's October 20th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It'll be live on Facebook and YouTube. So be looking out for that.
There.
And we'll see you there.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.